Hello, everyone. My name is Philip Martin. I'm 56 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that if you showed up consistently quietly without applause, you earned your place. I believed that family worked the same way as my trade. You do the job right, you keep things running, and eventually people understand your value. I was wrong. What I learned in the first days of the new year was that you can spend 17 years building something only to be told politely, efficiently, that you no longer fit the picture. And when that realization finally reached its breaking point, it didn't come with shouting or slammed fists. It came in a church fellowship hall under fluorescent lights with burnt coffee in the air when a young man looked at me and said, "That's not what I was told, and it hurts more than you know." By the time he walked out, my marriage was already over, my role in my daughter's life had been rewritten, and the people who thought they were protecting appearances were about to learn the cost of telling a cleaner lie. Before I tell you how it unraveled, take a second if this kind of story resonates with you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like this don't shout, they wait, and sometimes they sound a lot like your own life. The year had just turned. January in the Midwest has a way of scraping things down to their essentials. The holidays are gone, the decorations boxed up, the warmth packed away like it was never promised to stay. Outside snow sat in dirty ridges along the curb, gray and tired. Inside my head, I was still carrying the idea that the hardest part of the year was behind us. 2 days before everything came to a head, I was standing in the kitchen of the modest ranch house Elaine and I had shared for nearly 2 decades. The smell of cinnamon and something sweet left over from a New Year's pie she'd baked out of habit more than celebration hung in the air. The oven clicked softly as it cooled. A wall clock ticked steady and indifferent, counting seconds the way it always had. I'd just come in from a job site on East Washington Avenue, rewiring an old retail space that had cycled through too many failed businesses. The place smelled like dust and old paint and the faint ghost of perfume from whatever shop had been there before. I liked work like that. Wires don't lie. They don't care about your intentions. You cross them wrong, something trips. Sometimes something burns. The rules are clear. If you mess up, you know exactly why. Family doesn't come with that kind of manual. Elaine stood at the counter, smoothing pie dough she didn't really need to smooth anymore. Her hair was done, lipstick on, the same composed expression she used for office meetings, even though it was just me in the room. Lily texted, she said, not looking up. I shrugged out of my jacket. Everything okay. She and Andrew are stopping by midweek, just to say hi before they head out. I paused. Head out where? She hesitated. It was barely noticeable, half a second, but after 30 years in my trade, I knew the difference between a steady hum and a dangerous flicker. To meet Andrew's family, she said. Up in Milwaukee. I blinked. And I'm going. The question felt automatic. Lily was my stepdaughter, legally sure, but in every way that mattered, I'd been there since she was 9. Engagements meant introductions, handshakes, awkward smiles. You showed up. Elaine kept working the dough. It's just going to be me. Something cold slid down my spine, and it had nothing to do with the January wind outside. Why, I asked. She sighed like I'd asked her to explain gravity. Philip, it's complicated. That phrase again. People use it like a blanket, hoping if they throw it over the truth, you'll stop looking at the shape underneath. Lily's bringing her father, Elaine added quietly. I stared at her. Robert Hale. She finally met my eyes. There wasn't guilt there, just resignation, like she'd already decided what was easier. Andrew's family is traditional, she said. Lily wants this to go smoothly. I almost laughed, but it came out wrong. So what am I? Elaine's mouth tightened. Don't start. I've been in this house 17 years, I said, keeping my voice even. I paid for half of it. I fixed every outlet, every fan, every porch light that ever went bad. I drove Lily to school when your car wouldn't start. I signed for her first reliable car when Robert was nowhere to be found. Don't make this about money, she snapped. It's not about money, I said. It's about being there. She turned back to the counter. It's one meeting. The meeting, I said slowly, where families decide who belongs. She didn't answer. The clock kept ticking. Tick, 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 like time was keeping score. That night, I didn't argue. I ate what Elaine put in front of me. I rinsed my bowl. I wiped the counter out of habit. I marked my work hours in the small pocket calendar I'd carried for years. Steady, careful. The kind of man who believed life was mostly a series of small responsibilities done right. But something in my chest felt tight, like a wire being pulled too far. The next morning, the new year showed me exactly how replaceable I'd become. The morning after that conversation, January settled into the house like it meant to stay. Not the clean kind of cold you see in postcards, but the stubborn Midwest version that seeps into the bones and makes every sound sharper. I stood in the kitchen in my socks, waiting for the coffee maker to finish its slow, irritated sputter. The window above the sink was fogged around the edges, the world outside blurred into shades of gray and white. Snow from the night before had hardened into ridges along the driveway, already stained by tire tracks. Elaine moved quietly behind me, opening drawers, closing them again. The soft clink of ceramic against wood, filling the space where conversation usually lived. The clock on the wall ticked steady as ever. I watched the second hand sweep past the 12, then again. It struck me how little that clock cared about what was coming. "You working today?" she asked finally. "Half day," I said. "They pushed the afternoon job." She nodded. "Lily and Andrew will be here around noon." That was new information. I thought you said midweek. She paused just long enough for the silence to notice. Plans changed. The coffee finished dripping. I poured a mug black the way I'd always taken it and wrapped my hands around the heat. "So they're leaving today?" "Yes. And I didn't finish the question. I didn't need to. Elaine leaned against the counter and crossed her arms. "Philip, please don't do this first thing in the morning. Do what turn it into a confrontation." I took a slow breath. Years ago in the Navy, they taught us how to breathe through cold and fatigue, how to keep your expression neutral when the wind slapped you around and you couldn't afford to lose focus. That training had stuck. "I used it now. I just want to understand," I said. "They're leaving today to meet Andrew's family. You're going. Lily's bringing Robert, and I'm staying here." She looked down at the floor. "It's just easier this way." For who, she didn't answer. The front door opened before either of us could say more, letting in a sharp slice of winter air. Lily came in first, cheeks pink from the cold, her coat dusted with snow. She smelled like perfume, and outside like movement and plans. Andrew followed, polite as always, nodding to me with a small, uncertain smile. "Hey, Philip," he said. "Andrew," I replied. "Happy New Year." "Happy New Year," he echoed, though his eyes flicked to Elaine, then away. Lily kicked off her boots and set her bag by the door. It was bigger than an overnight bag, big enough for a few days, big enough to tell a story on its own. "We're just grabbing coffee and heading out," she said, already moving toward the counter. I watched her, this young woman I'd helped raise, the one I'd taught to change a tire in the driveway while snow crept into our boots, the one I'd waited up for on nights she stayed out too late pretending I wasn't worried. "So it's official," I said. "Milwaukee today." She hesitated, then shrugged. "Yeah, it made sense to go early. And I'm not coming." She looked at me, then really looked, impatience flashing across her face like I'd missed something obvious. "Philip, it's not a big deal. Help me understand why I said." Andrew shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe I should—" "No," Lily said quickly. "It's fine." She turned back to me. "My dad's going to be there. Andrew's family is particular. They wanted a certain first impression. And I don't fit it," I said. She exhaled, frustrated. "You're making this sound worse than it is." Elaine stepped in. "Philip, please." I held up a hand. "Just answer the question." Lily's voice hardened. "Andrew's parents are traditional. They asked about family, about stability. It was easier to explain things this way. This way, I repeated. Meaning without me." She crossed her arms. "You're not my father." The words landed with a dull finality. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise, like a switch flipping off. The kitchen felt suddenly too warm, the smell of coffee and leftover cinnamon turning thick in the air. Elaine stared at the counter like it might rescue her. Andrew looked down at his shoes. "I never said I was," I replied quietly. but I was there. Lily rolled her eyes. Look, don't make this weird. It's just a trip. A trip. A meeting where families looked each other in the eye and decided who belonged. I nodded once slow. Okay. She blinked clearly, expecting more. Elaine's shoulders sagged relief, mixing with something else she didn't name. Andrew gave me a small, grateful nod. They moved around me, then gathering coats, checking phones, the ordinary chaos of leaving the house. I stepped back, giving them room the way I always had. When Lily slung her bag over her shoulder, I noticed the tag still on it, bright and new. Bought for this purpose. Planned. At the door, she turned. "We'll be back in a few days," she said. "Don't be strange about it." I didn't answer. In my line of work, when a circuit is dead, you stop feeding it power. You don't argue with it. You don't plead. You accept what it is and move on. The door closed behind them, the sound final and clean. The house settled. The clock kept ticking. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the spot where they'd been feeling something inside me go quiet and heavy. They hadn't just left without me. They'd decided I didn't need to be part of the story they were telling. And as the new year stretched out ahead, cold and unwelcoming, I realized this wasn't about one trip. It was about erasing me without having to say the word. I didn't sleep much that night. The house felt hollow after they left, like sound traveled farther than it should. I lay awake listening to the heater kick on and off, the pipes ticking as they adjusted to the cold, the steady rhythm of the clock down the hall. Sometime before dawn, I gave up and got out of bed. January light crept into the kitchen, slowly gray and undecided. I stood there in my socks, waiting for the coffee to finish dripping, watching steam rise and vanish. I told myself I'd let it go. One trip, one meeting. People made choices all the time that didn't mean anything more than convenience. That lie lasted until my phone buzzed. I don't live on social media. I keep an account because Lily posts there, and sometimes Elaine does when she wants to show the world we're doing fine. That morning, the notification sat there on the screen like it had been waiting for me. Lily had posted a photo. There she was, bundled in a long coat, hair curled, smiling like she'd stepped into a future she was proud of. Elaine stood beside her, one hand on Lily's arm, and on the other side, closer than I'd ever seen him, was Robert Hale, her father, the man who'd missed birthdays and school concerts, and one long winter night in an emergency room when Lily was 12 and scared and clinging to my jacket sleeve. Behind them glowed a restaurant sign in Milwaukee warm lights strung across the windows, the kind of place you go when you want to impress someone. The caption read, "Family night. So grateful to have Dad here for this. Dad." My thumb hovered over the screen. For a second, there was a dull ringing in my ears, like pressure changing too fast. I was 19 again, standing watch in the Navy, learning how to keep my face neutral while the wind cut through every layer you had on. You learned early not to react. Reactions didn't keep you warm. They didn't change orders. But I wasn't 19 anymore. I set the phone down face up on the table and stared at it like it might explain itself. The coffee maker clicked off. The kitchen smelled sharp and bitter. Elaine came in a few minutes later, still in her robe, hair loose, the careful composure gone now that there was no audience. She saw my expression before she saw the phone. "Oh, Philip," she said, like she'd stepped on something she didn't want to deal with. "She posted it," I said quietly. Elaine glanced at the screen. She didn't flinch. "She's excited." I turned the phone so she couldn't miss the caption. She called him Dad. Her shoulders rose and fell. "Robert's trying. This is important to her." "What about what's important to me?" I asked. She looked away, busying herself with a mug that didn't need washing. And in that moment, something settled in my chest that hurt worse than the post itself. Her silence wasn't confusion. It was agreement. The front door opened not long after cold air rushing in. Lily came back inside, keys in hand, cheeks, flushed energy buzzing around her like static. "Hey," she said brightly, "we forgot." She stopped when she saw my face. I held up the phone. "So, you met Andrew's family?" She hesitated. "Yeah. And you took Robert." She shrugged like I'd asked if she'd picked up milk. "He's my dad." The words hit, but the next ones hit harder. Look, she said, impatience, sharpening her voice, don't make this into a thing. Andrew's parents are like that. They wanted a classy first impression. And I'm not, I asked. She exhaled, frustrated. Philip, you're not my father. The kitchen was warm. The smell of coffee hung in the air. The clock kept ticking. And still I felt cold. Elaine said nothing. I looked at Lily, this grown woman I'd helped raise, and felt something inside me go quiet and heavy like a breaker finally flipping. I didn't trust my voice enough to raise it. Okay, I said. I get it. She blinked, surprised I didn't argue. Elaine stared at the counter like it might save her. I walked past them down the hallway and grabbed my jacket, my movements steady even though my stomach twisted like a wire pulled too tight. Behind me, Lily called out, "We're leaving again tomorrow morning. Don't be weird about it." I didn't answer. In my line of work, when a line is dead, you stop feeding it power. You don't keep touching it, hoping it comes back to life. That afternoon, I packed a bag. Not much. A few changes of clothes, my boots, the pocket calendar I'd carried for years, the one where I wrote down hours and payments and proof that I'd shown up. I told Elaine I needed some space. She called it temporary. I didn't correct her. I drove to a small apartment near South Park Street, signed a short-term lease without much thought, and carried my things inside. The place smelled faintly of old coffee and lemon cleaner from the hallways. It wasn't much. A couch, a table, bare walls. That night alone in that quiet space, I understood something I hadn't before. They didn't just want me quiet, they wanted me invisible, and I was done pretending that erasure was the same thing as peace. The pounding on my apartment door came just after sunset, hard enough to rattle the cheap frame. Not a polite knock, not someone checking if I was home. The kind of knocking that assumes you owe an explanation. I stood in the narrow kitchen barefoot on cold laminate, watching the second hand on the wall clock sweep past the 12. Tick, tick, tick. The radiator clanked like it had opinions. Somewhere upstairs, a television laughed at a joke I couldn't hear. I already knew who it was. I opened the door anyway. Elaine pushed past me first, coat half-zipped, eyes bright with rehearsed anger. Lily followed, jaw-tight phone already in her hand, like evidence she was prepared to present. "What is wrong with you?" Elaine demanded as the door shut behind them. I stepped back to give them space. The apartment smelled faintly of last night's coffee and the lemon cleaner the building used in the halls. My boots were lined up by the door toes, pointed out habit drilled in by years of not wanting to trip in the dark. "You didn't answer my texts," Lily said. "I got them," I replied. "Then why didn't you respond?" Elaine cut in. "You've been acting strange, Philip. Cold, silent." I looked at her. "Okay," I said. "That's not an answer." She scoffed. "That's nothing. You're acting like we did something wrong." Lily let out a short, sharp laugh. "Yeah, like we betrayed you or something." The word hung there. Betrayed. I felt the pressure rise behind my eyes, the familiar warning that if I spoke too fast, I'd say something I couldn't take back. I thought about standing watch in the Navy, January nights so cold they burned, learning how to keep your jaw set because losing control didn't get you home any faster. "What do you want?" I asked. Elaine threw her hands up. "We want to understand why you're doing this." "Doing what? Acting like we erased you?" Lily said, sarcasm thick in her voice. I met her eyes. "You did." Silence cracked across the room like a breaker flipping. Elaine stared at me. "Philip, you're exaggerating. You went to meet his family," I said, calm, steady. "You took Robert. You told them he was Lily's father. And you told me not to come." "It was one meeting," Lily snapped. "Those meetings matter," I said. "They're where people decide who belongs." Elaine shook her head. "You're making this bigger than it is." "Am I asked. Lily stepped forward. "Andrew's family is image conscious. They asked about stability, about background. It was easier this way, easier for who I asked." She hesitated just long enough to matter, for everyone. Elaine rubbed her temples. We needed it to go smoothly. I let out a short breath. "You needed my name." "Not me." Neither of them denied it. I looked around the apartment, the bare walls, the ticking clock, the single jacket hanging by the door. I'd told myself the move was temporary. Space. That was the word Elaine used, like you could box up 17 years and stack it in a corner. This vibe, Lily said, gesturing around. It wouldn't have fit. Something inside me snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, internally, like a wire finally giving up. I've worked the same trade for 30 years, I said quietly. I show up. I pay my bills. I raised you when your father was gone. If that doesn't fit, that's not my problem. Elaine's face hardened. You don't get to guilt trip her. I'm not, I said. I'm stating facts. Lily rolled her eyes. Andrew's parents didn't even ask about you. That landed heavier than anything else. They didn't ask, I repeated. No, she said, because they were told you weren't really involved. I turned to Elaine. You told them that. Her lips parted, then closed. I simplified. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. You erased me. I was protecting Lily, she shot back. I stepped aside and opened the door. I'm done with this conversation. Elaine stared at me like she didn't recognize me. You're just walking away. Yes. They brushed past me into the hall. Cold air rushing in behind them. The door slammed. I locked it. The silence afterward was loud. I stood there longer than I should have, then grabbed my jacket and keys and headed out. The wind cut straight through me. Early January in Madison doesn't care how you feel. Snow hadn't fully fallen yet, but the ground was slick with half-frozen slush gray under the streetlights. I drove without thinking until I pulled into the parking lot of the VFW on the east side of town. The sign buzzed faintly. Inside it was warm in that tired way, old heat, old smells, coffee and beer and history baked into the walls. Flags lined the room, colors faded but still standing. Jack Reynolds spotted me and slid a mug across the table without a word. Black coffee strong enough to remind you it existed. You all right? He asked. Yeah, I said. Family stuff. He nodded and didn't push. At the VFW, nobody pokes at wounds that don't bleed. Snow started to fall outside light, at first drifting down like it had nowhere better to be. I watched it for a long time. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, I answered. Hello, Mr. Martin, a woman said, her voice careful. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm Andrew's mother. I tightened my grip on the mug. Yes, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I looked around at the flags, the quiet dignity of the place. No, it's fine. She took a breath. I wanted to ask you something. We were told you were just a roommate, not really part of the family. The words slid under my ribs like ice. I didn't answer right away. The coffee machine hissed behind me. A chair scraped. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life. I've never been anyone's roommate, I said finally. I married Elaine when Lily was 9. I raised her. There was a long pause. I see, Margaret said softly. That's not how it was explained to us. I figured, I replied. We value honesty, she said. So does Andrew. When we hung up, I stared into my coffee until the surface stopped shaking. Jack leaned back. Everything all right? Depends how you define all right, I said. I stayed until the snow thickened, then drove home slow and careful. Back in the apartment, I lined up my boots and hung my jacket. I didn't turn on the TV. For the first time since the year began, I knew staying quiet wasn't going to fix what had already been said. I woke before the alarm the next morning, the apartment still wrapped in that early January quiet where even the city seems to hesitate. The radiator clicked, once then went still. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying Margaret Collins' words over and over, not because they were cruel, but because they were careful. Just a roommate. The phrase had weight. It meant someone had chosen it deliberately. I made coffee and let it sit untouched while I paced the small kitchen. Outside the window, snow clung to the edges of the parking lot, thin and stubborn the way winter refuses to leave cleanly. I told myself I didn't need to do anything. I could stay quiet. I'd been good at that for years. Silence had always felt like control. But silence had also been used against me. I pulled the pocket calendar from my jacket and set it on the table, flipping through pages filled with ordinary proof of a life lived responsibly, work hours, payments, reminders scribbled in the margins. It struck me how much of my existence could be reduced to ink and dates, how easy it was for someone else to decide which parts mattered. That's when I opened the drawer. Inside were the things I'd never thought of as evidence. Just paperwork. Life paperwork. I wasn't looking for leverage. I was looking for truth, something solid I could hold without having to explain myself out loud. The first thing I found was the auto loan paperwork from Summit Credit Union. Lily had been 19, standing in a used car lot, scared and excited all at once. Her credit was thin. Robert hadn't returned her calls. "Can you help?" she'd asked, voice small. I'd signed without hesitation. "Because that's what you do." Under that was a hospital bill from years earlier. Nothing dramatic. Just expensive enough to make Elaine cry quietly at the kitchen table, numbers whispered like prayers. I'd written the check without comment, folded the receipt, and moved on. Then there was the high school graduation program. Lily's name printed cleanly on the page. My handwriting on the back left side bleachers. "Don't forget camera." I remembered sitting there, heart thudding like I was the one about to walk across the stage. I sat down slowly, the chair creaking under my weight. Spread out on the table, it wasn't a case. It was a timeline. 17 years laid flat. I didn't take everything. I didn't need to. I chose 3 things and slid them into a thin manila folder. The folder felt lighter than I expected, lighter than the weight in my chest. My phone buzzed. A text from Elaine. "We need to talk." I didn't reply. A few minutes later, an email came through from an unfamiliar address. "Mr. Martin, we're holding a small family meeting at our church this Sunday afternoon before final wedding plans. If you're willing, we'd like you there." Margaret Collins, I read it twice. Sunday, a public place, folding chairs, coffee urns, witnesses. I closed the folder and set it by the door. The days leading up to Sunday passed slower than they should have. Work helped. Wires still obeyed rules. Panels still hummed the way they were supposed to when you did things right. At night, the apartment stayed quiet. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't want noise filling the spaces where thoughts needed to sit. Elaine didn't call again. Lily didn't text. The absence was loud. Sunday morning arrived gray and cold. I stood in the small bathroom shaving, watching my reflection carefully like I might miss something important if I rushed. I put on my good jacket, the one without paint flecks on the sleeves. Old habits die hard. You show respect when you walk into someone else's space, even if they didn't show it to you first. The folder waited on the table, plain and unassuming. No labels, no drama. Half paperwork, half memories. I slid it under my arm and paused at the door. For a moment, I considered not going. Staying home would have been easier, letting them finish telling their version of things without interruption. I'd already been written out once. What was one more time? But a lie repeated often enough starts to feel like truth to everyone except the person it's about. I locked the door and headed out. The church sat between a dentist's office and a row of small houses with bare trees out front. Brick and modest, the kind of place that hosted potlucks and quiet prayers. The parking lot was half full, minivans, sedans, sensible cars for sensible people. I sat in my truck for a full minute, hands resting on the steering wheel, breath fogging the windshield. In the Navy before inspections, you always checked your uniform one last time. Not because you were afraid of getting in trouble, but because order mattered. It said something about who you were. I straightened my jacket, picked up the folder, and went inside. The fellowship hall smelled like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner, familiar in a way that tightened my chest. Folding chairs sat in uneven rows. A long table at the back held paper cups and sugar packets. The coffee urn gurgled like it had something to say. They were already there. Andrew stood near the window with his parents' shoulders tense. Lily sat a few chairs away, scrolling on her phone, leg bouncing. Elaine sat beside her, hands folded tight in her lap, eyes darting around the room like she was tracking exits. And Robert Hale was there too. He sat closer to the front than anyone else, arm draped over the back of a chair like he belonged there, wearing a blazer that didn't quite fit and a smile that suggested he'd been welcomed in already. I took a seat near the aisle. Not front, not back, neutral ground. I rested the folder on my knee and folded my hands over it, keeping them still. Elaine leaned toward me. "You came," she whispered. "I was invited," I said. "Please," she added softly, "don't make this harder than it has to be." I met her eyes. "I won't speak unless I'm spoken to." That was the promise I made myself. No speeches, no accusations, just truth if it was asked for. As the Collins family moved toward the front to begin the meeting, I felt the room settle into that expectant hush that comes right before something changes. And if this story feels uncomfortably familiar to you, you're not alone. Feel free to leave a thought in the comments when you're ready. The meeting began the way these things always do, polite, careful, wrapped in good intentions. Thomas Collins stood near the front of the fellowship hall, hands folded in front of him, his voice calm and measured. "We appreciate everyone coming," he said. "This is just a chance for our families to be on the same page before moving forward." Same page. I felt the thin edge of the folder press against my knee. Margaret Collins stood beside him, nodding along, her expression warm but watchful. Andrew hovered a step behind them, shoulders tense, eyes moving between his parents and Lily. Lily sat rigid in her chair, phone face down in her lap. Elaine kept her hands clasped tightly, knuckles pale. Robert leaned back, relaxed, like he'd already passed whatever test this was. Thomas continued talking about dates, venues, guest lists, ordinary things, safe things. I listened without interrupting, the way I always had, letting other people speak while I did the quiet work. But every time Robert chimed in, every time he spoke like he'd always been there, I felt something tighten in my jaw. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat again. "There is one thing I'd like to clarify," he said. His tone stayed polite, but something firmer settled underneath it. He looked around the room, then his eyes landed on me. He hesitated, like he was placing a face from memory. "And you are?" he asked. Before I could answer, Robert leaned forward. "That's Philip. He and Elaine were married." He waved a hand, casual, past tense. Thomas nodded slowly. "I see." I kept my mouth shut. The meeting moved on for another minute or two, but the air had changed. Andrew shifted in his seat, his brow furrowed. Margaret glanced at Thomas, then back at me, something unsettled in her eyes. Philip Thomas said at last, "May I ask you something?" I looked up. "Yes." The room leaned in. Even the coffee urn at the back clicked off, plunging the space into a deeper quiet. "How long," he asked carefully, "have you been part of Lily's life?" The question was simple. It carried more weight than anything else that had been said. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the first time Lily stopped calling me that guy my mom's dating and started using my name. I thought about teaching her how to drive in an empty parking lot, snow falling softly around us. I thought about waiting up late nights pretending I wasn't worried. 17 years, I said. I married Elaine when Lily was 9. Robert shifted in his chair. Well, technically, I raised a hand without looking at him. My eyes stayed on Thomas. "You asked how long I've been part of her life," I said evenly. "That's the answer." Thomas nodded once. "And during that time I was there," I said. Robert scoffed. "Come on, you make it sound like let him finish," Thomas said, holding up a finger. "That was when I opened the folder. I didn't dump anything out. I didn't slide papers across the table like I was presenting a case. I took one document at a time, holding each only long enough to explain, then placing it back neatly. "This is a co-signed auto loan," I said. "Lily's first reliable car. She needed it for school and work. Her biological father wasn't available." Robert's jaw tightened. "This is a medical bill," I continued. "From when she was 12. Nothing dramatic. Just something a family handles." I placed it back in the folder, careful, precise. "And this," I said, lifting the graduation program, "is from her high school commencement. I sat on the left side bleachers so I could get a clear photo when she walked." I looked up then. Lily's face had gone pale. Her phone lay forgotten in her lap. She stared at the program like it might disappear if she didn't acknowledge it. I didn't keep these to prove anything I said quietly. I kept them because they were my life. The silence stretched. Margaret pressed her lips together. Andrew stared at the floor, then slowly lifted his head and looked at Lily. "Is that true?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry, it was wounded. Lily opened her mouth, closed it. Her fingers curled tight around the edge of her chair. Robert leaned forward again. "This is getting blown out of proportion. I'm her father." Andrew turned to him. "Then why wasn't any of this mentioned?" Robert shrugged. Didn't seem relevant. Margaret exhaled through her nose. "Relevance depends on honesty." Elaine finally spoke, her voice small. "I didn't think it mattered. We just wanted things to be smooth." "Smooth isn't the same as honest," Thomas said. No one argued. Andrew stood up, running a hand through his hair. His voice was steady, but something in it had cracked. "That's not what I was told," he said, looking at Lily now. "And it hurts more than you know." The words landed heavy and final. No one moved. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I felt tired, the kind of tired that comes after carrying something too long and finally setting it down. "I need some air," Andrew said. He walked out without waiting for a response. The door closed softly behind him, but the sound echoed anyway. The room felt smaller. Robert stared straight ahead. Elaine's shoulders slumped. Lily's eyes shone with something that might have been regret or might have just been fear. I closed the folder and rested it back on my knee. "I didn't come here to ruin anything," I said quietly. "I came because I was asked a question." No one contradicted me. The clock on the wall ticked loud and steady, and for the first time in a long while, the truth had nowhere left to hide. The fallout didn't come all at once. It spread the way cold does in a house with bad insulation, quiet, persistent, finding every gap. By Monday morning, the calls started. Careful ones. Voices, lowered words chosen like they might break if handled wrong. A woman from church left a voicemail that began with, "I don't want to take sides," and ended without saying much at all. I listened to it once, then deleted it. I wasn't interested in sides. I was interested in distance. Elaine didn't come home that night. I wasn't surprised. I sat alone at the small kitchen table in my apartment, the pocket calendar open in front of me, pen resting between my fingers like I still had somewhere to be. Old habits die slow. I kept checking the clock anyway. When she finally called, it was close to midnight. Her voice sounded thin, stretched too far. "I'm staying at my sister's," she said. "I need time." "Time for what I asked." "To think," she said quickly, then sharper. "You embarrassed Lily. You embarrassed all of us." I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. The light buzzed faintly. "I answered a question," I said. "In a room where I was invited." "You didn't have to bring papers," she snapped. "You didn't have to say all of that. They asked how long I'd been part of her life," I said. "What was I supposed to do, lie better than you did?" Silence filled the line. Then Elaine said something she hadn't planned to. "I knew Robert had been talking to her," she admitted. "For months." My grip tightened on the phone. "You knew." He kept saying things she rushed on, about how families look, about what Andrew's parents would expect. "I didn't think it would go this far." "But you let it," I said. "I didn't stop it," she whispered. That was the moment something in me finally shifted. Not anger, not even hurt, just clarity. "I stood watch in the Navy," I said, my voice steady, "in the middle of the night, freezing. Because when it's your post, you don't walk away. You left yours." She started to cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't soften it either. "I'm not doing this anymore," I said. "I'm not pretending I'm optional." We hung up without saying goodbye. 2 days later, I sat across from a loan officer at Summit Credit Union, the same place I'd signed papers for years without thinking twice. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside snow had turned the parking lot into a gray soup of slush and tire tracks. "I'm not looking to punish anyone," I said, hands folded on the desk. "I just want things clean." She nodded. "That's usually the smartest way." We went over accounts, obligations, the places where my name still carried weight and the places where it shouldn't anymore. Mortgages, loans, automatic payments that had once felt like stability and now felt like anchors. I made one decision that surprised even me. I didn't pull the emergency account I'd set aside for Lily years ago. I signed it over fully. No strings, no speeches. She's going to need it, I said simply, but she won't need me tied to it. Walking out of the building, the cold hit hard. The wind off the lake cut straight through my jacket, sharp enough to steal your breath. I stood there for a moment and let it. In the Navy, you learn the difference between cold that hurts and cold that wakes you up. That night back in the apartment, the silence felt heavier than before. The radiator clanked. The clock ticked. I thought about long nights on the ship when everyone else slept, when the only thing keeping you company was dark water and your own thoughts. I'd never felt lonely then. This was different. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from an unknown number. "Philip, this is Andrew. I think you deserve to hear something directly." I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "Go ahead." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Whatever was coming next, I knew one thing for certain. Telling the truth had cost me my marriage as I knew it. But for the first time in a long while, I could breathe. We met 2 weeks later at a diner off Monroe Street, the kind of place that never bothered to remodel because the coffee was hot and nobody rushed you out the door. Snow sat in uneven piles along the curb outside, gray at the edges, scraped thin by plows that had better places to be. Inside, it smelled like bacon, greased toast, and burnt coffee, the good kind of ordinary. I was already there when Andrew walked in, sitting in a booth by the window. My jacket hung on the hook. The pocket calendar rested where it always did, tucked away like proof that time still moved forward whether you argued with it or not. He hesitated when he saw me, like he wasn't sure I'd changed my mind, then crossed the room. "Mr. Martin," he said. "Philip," I replied gently. "Sit." He slid into the booth across from me, hands clasped tight in front of him. He looked tired, not angry, just worn down by disappointment that hadn't found a place to land yet. The waitress topped off our coffee without asking, gave Andrew a look like she could tell this wasn't a casual breakfast, then moved on. "I wanted to say this face to face," Andrew said. "I respect you, more than I respect her biological father." I didn't answer right away. Outside, a snowplow crawled past, blades scraping, sparks jumping when it hit uneven pavement. "Respect," I said finally, "isn't something you say to make things better. It's something you live with." He nodded. "That's why I'm here." He told me the wedding was on hold, not canceled, not moved forward, just paused. "My parents care about honesty," he said. "If a marriage starts with a lie, it doesn't stand much of a chance." I stirred my coffee slowly. "Some things don't get fixed the way people want." He swallowed. "Lily's scared. She doesn't know how to fix what she broke." He slid his phone across the table. "She asked me to show you this." The message was short. "Thanks for everything." I didn't know how to say it. I stared at it longer than I needed to. Sometimes apologies don't heal what they're meant to. Sometimes they just acknowledge the damage. "People think choosing one story means erasing another," I said quietly. "That's not how it works." Andrew nodded. "I'm still figuring things out." "So am I," said. We finished our coffee in silence, not awkward, just honest. When I stepped back into the cold afterward, the air felt sharp but clean, the kind that clears your head. I pulled my jacket tighter and stood there for a moment, watching my breath drift away. Elaine called later that night. I didn't answer. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done living in the space where my worth depended on someone else saying my name. Weeks passed, then months, work, coffee, quiet evenings. I fixed things around the apartment that didn't need fixing just to remind myself I still could. One morning, back at that same diner, I opened my pocket calendar and started planning ahead. Nothing big. An oil change, a doctor's appointment, a fishing trip I'd been putting off. Life settled into something unremarkable and solid. I realized then that being a father was never about a title. It was about showing up, staying steady, holding the line when it would have been easier to walk away even if in the end no one clapped. If this story stayed with you, if it touched something quiet and familiar, take a moment to share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Sometimes the loudest thing a man can do is tell the truth and then keep walking.